I just realized that in the last video we talked about pyramids, markets, mummies, but not food. So we stopped for lunch at this very lively place and we had koshari, that's Egypt's national food, and of course falafel, grilled meat, fresh Egyptian bread, smoky baba ganoush, tahini, and so much more. I hope you are enjoying your virtual journey through Egypt with me. So welcome to part 2 of my Egypt travel vlog. I am Ocean and you're watching Unseen Ocean, where we unseen with food and see the unseen through travel. So let's unseen one story at a time. Remember those school history lessons on Egyptian civilization and papyrus? Well, I never thought I would see it made for real until today. We walked into a tiny papyrus workshop where they still make it the old way by hand. They peel away the green outer skin to reveal the soft white inner stem. Then cut it into thin strips, soak them in water for a few days, and lay them out in a crisscross pattern. The plant's own sap acts like glue, so when it's pressed under weight, it sticks. Once it's dried, they polish it smooth, and just like that, you have a sheet of papyrus. They turn these into beautiful artworks with Egyptian gods and even modern designs like glow-in-the-dark ones. And yes, we did buy one. Quick buyer's tip: look for the crisscross fibers when you hold it to light. Real papyrus shows that weave. Many banana paper fakes don't. After this, we headed to a part of Cairo that feels completely different from everything you have seen so far. And that's Coptic Cairo. Coptic basically refers to the Egyptian Christians, and their neighborhood is one of the oldest inhabited parts of the city, with roots going back nearly 2000 years. When Christianity began to spread through Egypt, many believers settled here for safety and community. It became a center of worship long before Islam arrived in the country. Our first stop was a place believed to be where the Holy Family, Mother Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus stayed during their flight from King Herod. The story goes that around 1st century AD, they fled from Bethlehem in modern-day Palestine, crossed into Sinai, and eventually reached what is now Cairo. According to local belief, they lived here for about a week while seeking refuge. You can still see the well where they said to have drawn water from, and a small church making the spot where they prayed. From here, we walked over to one of Cairo's most famous landmarks, the Hanging Church, also known as the Church of Saint Virgin Mary. It is called Hanging Church because it was built on top of the old Roman fortress of Babylon. So when you stand at the entrance, you're actually above ground level, almost hanging over the ancient walls. This church is around 1300 years old, making it one of the oldest in Egypt, and it's still in use today. Walking around here, you can feel how Cairo is layered with history. Pharaonic, Roman, Christian, Islamic, all in one city. With that, our Cairo chapter comes to an end because next we are catching a flight to Aswan to start a whole new adventure. Our first stop was the Aswan High Dam, a massive engineering project completed in the 1970s that completely changed Egypt's future. It controls the Nile floods, provides electricity, and created Lake Nasir, one of the largest man made lakes in the world. From there, we took a short boat ride to Philae Temple dedicated to goddess Isis. This temple isn't just beautiful, it has a dramatic story. In the 1960s, when the High Dam was built, the rising waters of Lake Nasir threatened to submerge it. So UNESCO stepped in and moved the entire temple stone by stone to a nearby island. Standing there, it is hard to believe that this whole thing was relocated. By afternoon, we checked into our Nile cruise. We went to bed early that night because the next morning was going to start early. More than 4 hours of endless golden sand, and then there it was. Abu Simbel. Two giant rock temples carved straight into a cliff over 3000 years ago by Pharaoh Ramses II. Remember, we had seen his huge statue in the Memphis Open Air Museum? Well, yes, he also built this huge temple for himself 3000 years ago. The main temple has 4 colossal statues, each 20 meters high, all of Ramses himself, staring out over the Nile as if to say, I am eternal. But here's the wild part. This temple isn't standing here by luck. In the 1960s, the rising waters from the Aswan High Dam would have swallowed it forever. So UNESCO again and an international team pulled off one of the greatest archaeological rescue mission history, cutting the temple into over 1,000 blocks, each weighing up to 30 tons, and moving it to 65 meter higher and 200 meters back. And then rebuilt it perfectly so the sun still aligns with the inner sanctum twice a year, on Ramses' birthday and coronation day, lighting up its statue from inside. And that's when I thought, if the world can come together to save a temple in the middle of a Nubian desert, why can't we do the same for treasures back in India? Look at Dholavira in Gujarat, for example. A city from the Indus Valley civilization, over 4,000 years old, with massive stone walls, water reservoirs, and streets planned with the precision of a modern grid. Yet today, much of it lies exposed and eroded, waiting for care. We have history, we have the skill. What we need is the will and the pride to preserve them like this. Maybe if we talked about it more, we would start doing it more. Well, coming back to Abu Simbel, inside the walls are alive with hieroglyphs and battle scenes, including Ramses's grand retelling of the Battle of Kadesh, his personal "I am the hero" carved in stone. Next door is a smaller temple for his queen Nefertari, one of the rare temples in Egypt dedicated to a woman. Walking out, you feel it. Awe for an ancient Egyptian who built this, and equal awe for the modern engineers who saved it.
Well, absorbing that in while we drove back to Aswan and checked back into our Nile cruise, we were welcomed by this very cute elephant and a mesmerizing view of the Nile from our room. Just look at that. How pristine.
That evening, our cruise stopped at Kom Ombo, a temple unlike any other in Egypt. Built right on Nile's edge, it is dedicated to two gods at once: Sobek, the crocodile god, and Horus, the falcon headed god of the sky. Walking in at night under the golden lights, the walls seem to whisper stories. The Egyptian calendar carved into the temple wasn't just decoration. It was a practical tool that ran the entire agricultural life of the Nile Valley. They divided the year into three seasons: Akhet, the flooding season; Peret, the growing season; and Shemu, the harvest season. Each season had 4 months, and each month had 30 days. That makes 12 into 30, 360 days in a year. But here's the clever part. They knew that solar year is slightly longer, so they added 5 extra festival days at the end of the year dedicated to the birthdays of important gods. No weeks, no weekends. Time was just counted in continuous days. The concept of a rest day didn't exist. Life revolved around Nile's rhythm, not a 7-day cycle. When you think about it, this system was simple, predictable, and worked perfectly for thousands of years, and it's not far off from the 365-day year we still use today. And just when you think you have seen it all, you turn a corner and there's a crocodile. Not alive, thankfully, but mummified. The ancient Egyptians worshipped Sobek, the crocodile god, and even mummified. To see how even eggs were mummified, you can see those little bones and faces coming out of the eggs, perfectly mummified thousands and thousands of years ago. I was spellbound. The next morning, we were up again at 5 a.m. to see the temple of Horus at Edfu, the second largest temple in Egypt. It's dedicated to Horus, the falcon-headed god who protects people from harm. This place stayed buried under sand for almost 2000 years, which is why it still looks so sharp today. Some of the carvings here tell the story of Horus fighting his uncle Set for control over Egypt, an ancient family drama carved in stone. We didn't stay here too long though. After a while, many temples start to look and feel similar, but each still has its own little stories to tell. Here, a detailed recipe book carved in stone showing how the ancient Egyptians made perfumes and medicine formula by formula. There are 108 recipes carved on this wall with perfect measures and steps, elaborately inscribed. And today, Egyptians still follow these methods to make aromatic perfumes that you can go and buy from the stores. Until next time, bye.